Open source is where it all starts, but telcos look to their vendor partners for commercial implementations and support. Mark, with Canonical through Ubuntu, it appears that you're taking a more managed services approach to this sector. How is your play with the telecom sector, and how are you positioning yourselves?
Well, managed services are an accelerant to the adoption of complex open source. Right? I think telcos, but also other sectors, retail, media, finance, they understand that their infrastructure needs to move to open source. That presents them with a whole new set of challenges in terms of choosing, judging, integrating, operating software that has a curious collection of names. That doesn't have one obvious vendor behind it, and which moves much faster than anything they've ever seen before. So what we found is that if we offer value, for example, OpenStack or Kubernetes or AI as a managed service, it shortens the time to a decision, because people say, okay, I can get to a result, I can get to a working OpenStack, or I can get to a working AI infrastructure, or I can get to a working edge cloud, or I can get to a working AI IoT solution on a kind of fixed price, fixed time kind of basis. That then allows the institution to engage, start figuring out how to bring workloads, NFV workloads or IT workloads onto that infrastructure, start to figure out how to get value from that, and then they can take over the operations now that we've kind of laid it out for them and shown them how to do it. In the past, we were quite widely recognized by the experts like Google, Microsoft, IBM as the sort of front runner in the latest, greatest open source, the sharpest sword in open source effectively. But the sort of the traditional enterprise market wasn't sure what to make with all the parts, right? By offering stuff as a managed service, we essentially say, here's a reference, here's a lighthouse, here is a starting point effectively. We'll get you up and running with OpenStack. We'll get you up and running with Kubernetes. We'll get you up and running with XYZ. Then they can take over the operations as soon as they see that works for them as a business. So it's really reducing the cost of getting started, it's reducing the time to get started, it's reducing the time to get value, but without disempowering them, right? It's open source. If they want to take it over, they can take it over.
Are telco requirements for open source, particularly OpenStack, are they different from other enterprise sectors?
Yes and no. So we do see some specialized requirements for network functions, for example, in networking, latency, and so on and so forth. You'll find that there are IT workloads which care about similar sorts of things. So passing through specialized hardware to an application, right, which is sitting inside a virtual machine, isn't limited to being of telco value. We find ourselves taking a lot of stuff that we pioneered, because we're sort of the lead OpenStack in the telco space, so we pioneered some stuff there that we're taking into banks. And that's super interesting. So yes, I think we hire people who have telco backgrounds because we're able to sort of engage with telco type problems, but I would say that that's only 15% of the whole story. And in fact, the more we can essentially make a telco cloud look, feel, and operate just like a banking cloud, just like a retail cloud, the better for everybody, because they're sharing all of the learnings on operations, they're sharing all of the fixes effectively to the stuff that everybody does actually share.
Have telcos and telco management got past the issue of reliability and how easy to maintain and upgrade?
So I'm laughing because I don't think telcos will never get past the issue of reliability, right? Yeah. It's called telco grade for a reason, and I like that. I like the challenge that 9.9's sort of vision puts out for you, right? It's a stern requirement, and I like that. I think telcos are coming to understand that there are more modern ways to achieve resilience and reliability than they had in the past. In the past, they would say, look, I'm super profitable, so you, Mr. Network Equipment Provider, will present me with a box which is very, very expensive, but then you guarantee the number of nines on that. Well, that's one approach. Yeah. It's a very old and outdated approach, right? Since we're the guys who are deepest in public cloud, and with all the people who are essentially delivering what you could arguably think of as modern telco services, right, like video over the top and so on and so forth, since we're in there and we see how those guys do their service provisioning effectively with incredible reliability at scale, very cost effectively, we're able to help the telcos understand those cloud native type practices and achieve their reliability requirements in new and perhaps, or certainly economically more efficient ways.
Are we evolving to a more data center type world? We're talking about edge a lot of this event. We're looking at the central office sites that are becoming data centers.
The pendulum always swings. And so, the emergence of the public clouds put the spotlight on, giant centralized infrastructure again. People realized they could unlock a lot of value in those giant centralized infrastructures if they could buy them, by the slice, by the hour. And so that idea is quickly spread into the enterprise, and it starts with their giant data centers. But you can, that pendulum then swings back out to the edge with people saying, well, if I had this level of automation everywhere other than my giant data centers, I could do even better. And so the whole edge computing phenomenon is really just that pendulum swinging and people saying, why can't I get on-demand compute wherever I happen to need it, right? So we have great visibility on telco edge progress. Every single reference architecture that's been published by any telco that we've seen to date has been built on two things from Canonical. One is Ubuntu, and the other is MAS, Metal as a Service. It's a small piece of code that does one thing and only one thing, and it does it very well, which is take any server in any cabinet or rack or wall-mounted environment from switched off to turned on and provisioned with Windows or Linux. And so it essentially very elegantly and very cleanly solves, the one problem that is true of every cloud deployment, which is you won't have a human there, right? Yeah. And so it's very interesting. I think that there are two laws of physics that govern, people's edge architectures in the end. One is you won't have a human there, so that's why people choose MAS. The other is that overhead becomes more and more toxic the smaller the cluster. So the closer you get to the true edge, the less you want to have any overhead whatsoever, because obviously the clusters are getting smaller and smaller, and overhead is economically damaging at the edge. So being lean and minimal is just ultimately super important, and we're very good at that.
And whilst we're talking telco architectures, what about NFV and NFV infrastructure? How are you approaching that? Is it like more of a partnership for you to play on the boundaries of NFV?
Yeah, so we want to improve the lives of both the VNF vendors and the operators. And the way we can do that is by helping the VNF vendors essentially streamline the process by which telcos can onboard their functions. And ultimately, our vision is to create a marketplace where telcos, operators can pick from a variety of functions, from a variety of new and exciting as well as long trusted brands, and quickly evaluate them, come to a conclusion about their fitness for purpose, and then put them into production, right? So shortening the time for that process and the cost and the friction of that process really involves the platform, which is in the middle, right? This is an app running on Ubuntu, right? Yeah. Effectively, the clouds, the telcos are typically choosing Ubuntu. Yeah. So if we can essentially shorten the time for both parties, for the VNF vendors to essentially prove their value and the operators to put that value into production, then we've really moved things forward for everybody.
Now, those telcos, all telcos looking to transform their businesses, more competition, they need to change. The larger ones are more resourced and able to do it. The smaller ones are more difficult. They've got to innovate. They need to collaborate to do that. They're looking to open source. What's your advice? Because it's got to be quite a daunting process for a lot of telcos, especially those telcos who are not at the leading edge of this, who are somewhat a few years behind. From your perspective, is there like an optimal strategy or game plan that they really should be adopting now? I
think both groups are exciting. So you have the very large telcos. It's perhaps stating the obvious, but sometimes they can be incredibly slow to move, and we will essentially tend to wait until they're ready. There's not a lot of point in trying to convince an institution that it needs to change until basically its income statement tells it that it needs to change, right? That's a message that can't be ignored, and it creates an imperative for people to talk to us. But amongst them, there are some very large telcos who have the depth, of analysis or forward-looking capability to do really interesting work. So for example, AT&T has done some pretty trailblazing work. We've seen the same at Deutsche Telekom, SoftBank. And for us, it's very exciting to work with those guys because they understand Ubuntu, they understand open source, they really want to unlock the value of that for their businesses. They have the depth to fund real research and development to get it right, and they act as a beacon for all of the traditional incumbents. It's also exciting to work with the disruptors, right? So some of our, I think, the most fun customers in telco are youthful telecom operators who are challengers, and they're coming into markets and they're showing that you can operate much faster and you can deliver at much better costs. Obviously, we're essential to them because we represent a leaner, meaner view of what open source can do for a business than some of our predecessors. And they make decisions quickly, they try stuff, and then whatever works, they ramp up and scale quickly.
Great. Mark, thanks for joining us again on Telecom TV. Always a pleasure.
Great pleasure.